early 1920s, America was changing. The age of Prohibition gave rise to bootleggers, bandits, and killers who roamed the Midwest with Tommy guns and fast cars. Among them stood one name whispered in fear across Kansas and Missouri: Eddie Adams, a man who went from a quiet Kansas barber to one of the most violent outlaws in the Midwest. This is the story of how his short, bloody life ended in a storm of bullets, and how a crowd of 9,000 people lined up just to see his corpse. Edward J. Eddie Adams was born in 1887 on a quiet farm near Hutchinson, Kansas. His real name was W.J. Wallace. His father died when he was young, leaving him to grow up under a stepfather he despised. That resentment grew into anger, and anger into rebellion. He learned the barber trade, hoping for a simple life, and moved to Wichita, Kansas in the early 1900s. But instead of cutting hair, Eddie started cutting corners. In Wichita, he met John Callahan, a man already deep in crime, bootlegging, car theft, and small-time robberies. Together, they built their reputations in the city's underworld. Eddie had charm. He was bold, magnetic, and always surrounded by women and criminals who admired him. But his marriage fell apart when his wife couldn't handle his dangerous lifestyle and constant infidelities. By the time Prohibition began, Eddie Adams was no longer just a petty thief. He had become the leader of his own gang, a charismatic outlaw chasing money, adrenaline, and notoriety. In 1920, through his old partner Callahan, Adams met two brothers, Ray and Walter Majors, violent men eager for big money. Together, they planned to rob a Kansas City gambling den on Grand Avenue owned by Harry Trisdell, a man as dangerous as the criminals who wanted to rob him. On September 5th, 1920, Adams and his gang stormed the gambling house in broad daylight. But things went terribly wrong. Gunfire erupted. Patrons fought back. When the smoke cleared, gambler Frank Gardner was dead, and Adams' gang was captured by police. Eddie Adams was identified as the gunman who fired the fatal shot. In February 1921, he was sentenced to life in prison for murder. His partners, the Majors brothers, pleaded guilty to robbery and received lighter sentences, just 5 years each. Ironically, both would die behind bars. While being transported to the Missouri State Prison in Jefferson City, Adams made his first daring escape. He jumped off the train and disappeared. Within days, he teamed up with another outlaw, Julius Finney, and together they robbed a bank and general store in Cullison, Kansas, on February 11th, 1921. 6 days later, after wrecking a stolen car under a bridge, Adams was captured by a posse near Gardner Plain. Convicted of bank robbery, he was sentenced to serve 10 to 30 years at the Kansas State Prison in Lansing, in addition to his life sentence in Missouri. But Eddie Adams was not the type to spend his life behind bars. On August 13th, 1921, he sabotaged the prison's power plant, creating a blackout, and scaled the walls in the dark of night. With him were 3 other inmates: Frank Foster, George Weisberger, and D.C. Brown. Their getaway driver was Billy Finnelman, a World War I veteran turned criminal. Brown was quickly recaptured, but the others vanished into the Midwest, forming what became known as the Adams Gang. By September, the gang was on a rampage. They robbed banks in Rose Hill and Hayesville, Kansas, taking around $10,000. During the Hayesville robbery, Adams brutally pistol-whipped an 82-year-old man named James Creeville for no reason. The elderly man later died from fractured skull. Police were desperate to stop the gang. On October 8th, they tried to trap them near Onoli, Kansas, but a fierce gunfight broke out, leaving Deputy Benjamin Fisher wounded while the gang escaped. The spree didn't end there. 11 days later, Adams and his crew stole $500 in silver from a bank in Osceola, Iowa. A posse caught up with them near Murray, but another shootout erupted. This time, Sheriff C.J. Jones was killed. The gang stole the sheriff's car and fled south toward Wichita, robbing 11 stores in Muskota, Kansas, along the way. They even kidnapped 2 motorcycle officers outside Wichita, robbed them, and set their bikes on fire. Eddie Adams had become a legend of terror. He was fearless, violent, and unpredictable. On November 5th, 1921, he committed his coldest act yet. He shot and killed patrolman A.L. Young in Wichita, all because of jealousy. The two men had reportedly been in love with the same woman, and Adams couldn't stand losing. The murder shocked the city. Just days later, Adams and his gang pulled off their biggest heist, robbing a Santa Fe Express train near Ottawa, Kansas, and making off with $35,000 in cash. But their success wouldn't last. On the night of November 20th, 1921, Adams was in Wichita again, joyriding with Frank Foster, a local madam named Nellie Miles, a thug named George McFarland, and two prostitutes. Another car followed behind them, driven by Finelman and carrying more members of the gang. Two motorcycle policemen pulled over Adams' car, and in an instant, a gunshot rang out. It's unknown who pulled the trigger, but patrolman Robert Fitzpatrick was hit and killed instantly. The gang fled the city, heading south into Cowley County. When they ran out of gas, they stopped at a rural farm. Adams tried to steal a car from farmer George Oldham, but when the man resisted, Adams shot and killed him. Adams and Foster took the stolen car and returned to Wichita. McFarland ran off alone into the night. The next day, Adams and Billy Finelman went to McFarland's house looking for him, but police were already there. When officers Ray Kasner and another patrolman entered, Adams opened fire, hitting Kasner and forcing the second officer to hide under a bed. Once again, Adams escaped. For 2 days, he hid in the shadows of Wichita, waiting for his moment to flee the city for good. He chose November 22nd, the day of Officer Fitzpatrick's funeral, assuming most police would be at the ceremony. But luck had finally run out. That morning, Adams went to a local garage to rent a car, planning to leave town forever. The owner recognized him immediately and quietly called the police. 3 officers arrived moments later. Adams pulled his gun and fired. Detective Charles Hoffman was hit, but managed to grab Adams and drag him down. Officer Charles Bowman was also wounded. Then, from behind a pillar, Officer D.C. Stuckey fired 3 precise shots. Eddie Adams collapsed, dead on the floor. Word spread fast. Wichita's most feared outlaw was gone. His body was put on public display at the City Undertaking Parlor, where more than 9,000 people came to see him. The man who had killed 7, wounded a dozen more, and terrorized an entire region. In the aftermath, 18 people were arrested as accomplices and hangers-on of the Adams gang. 4 of them, including Frank Foster, were sent to prison, Foster for life. Eddie Adams died at just 34 years old, leaving behind a trail of blood, betrayal, and fear. In barely over 14 months, he was responsible for 7 murders, including 3 Wichita policemen. To some, he was a modern-day Jesse James. To others, just another killer who couldn't escape his fate. His story remains one of the most violent and chaotic chapters in early 20th century America. A reminder that no matter how high an outlaw rises, the law always catches up in the end. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more chilling true crime tales like this, just follow me.